was formed because they never wanted peace. They don't believe in peace. The reason why they exist is because they think that Israel does not have the right to exist. You can't negotiate peace with someone who believes that Israel has not the right to exist and then commit these horrific, terrifying, criminal acts. My heart is hurting today. Look at those horrific pictures of children, of elderly, parachuted upon and killed. There is a responsibility that we all have to stamp this out collectively. Hamas cannot continue. I'm standing here today to tell you, and I know that I have a great responsibility as being the ranking Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So my voice will not be silent, whether it's here in New York, or when I get back to Washington, D.C. tomorrow, or I travel any place else in the world. I know that President Biden and Secretary Blinken have been talking to leaders around the world, as to make sure that this is not just an issue for Israel. This is an issue for every single human being that's on this planet. We cannot stand by silently. Silence is an acceptance of this horrific act. So we've got to speak out. You've got to stand up. I was talking to my good friend, Rabbi Miller from JCRC. We've been communicating on a daily basis. His niece and family members held up in a shelter as they hear bombs and gunshots outside their doors. He is safe, but he's worried about his family. I have been to the Gaza Strip. I have seen and been in the tunnels of which they dug. Each and every place where they are, where they're hiding weapons and munitions, must be destroyed. Yes, yes. And so, I called my colleague, Mike McCall, and we had a conversation and said it cannot be a Democratic and a Republican issue. It's a United States Congress issue. So we drafted a joint resolution, worked on it, that will be the first bill when we have the opportunity to vote on a bill on the floor that the United States Congress puts out to vote on, so that the voices of the American people by its representatives will be heard loudly and clearly around the world. So I conclude by saying to you, just as we looked and hunted the leadership of Al-Qaeda, we're going to hunt and look and find and bring to justice the leadership of Hamas. I stand strongly, loudly, and proudly with the people of Israel, and my heart, my soul, my prayers go out to each and every one of them.
Thank you so much, Chairman Meeks. Thank you to our Borough President, Donovan Richards, to his entire team who helped put this together over Shabbat and the holiday weekend, to QJCC, Michael, all of our organizations who are here today. Today and every day, we pray for the people of Israel. Over the past 72 hours, we have watched in horror as innocent men, women, and children lost their lives at the hands of Hamas. We mourn for those we lost, and we stand united today to unequivocally condemn this horrific terrorist act. That evening, after we started hearing about the news here in New York, I stopped by some of our local shuls. I didn't know exactly what I would say, but I just knew that I wanted to be with the community. And what was supposed to be an evening of dancing and singing for Simchat Torah turned into me telling some of our families for the first time what had been going on in Israel. And it turned into wiping tears off the faces of so many of my constituents who had not yet heard about what had happened. I want to thank the NYPD, locally here, the 107th and other precincts, for being in constant communication with us, local elected officials on the ground, all of my colleagues here behind me. In the early hours after we heard the news, they were stationed outside of many of our synagogues and areas of concern in our neighborhoods here in Queens. And I wanted to say thank you to them. It's been mentioned already, but I think it's worth saying that it is important that we understand that there is no time or space for politics right now. From the left to the right, anywhere in between to the extremes, there is no time for politics. Even in this crowd today, there is a wide spectrum of members of our community with different political beliefs, and that's fine. But we are here today to say that Israel has the right to defend itself and its people against any and all threats. And I have been disappointed over the weekend because we have seen things from social media to in-person gatherings of people literally playing politics with these tragedies. From rallies attended by DSA members, cheering the rape, murder, and kidnapping of innocent civilians, from children to grandparents, to people holding up swastika images, to some, on the other side, of our national political leaders going on TV saying that this is a good political opportunity for their candidates. Not okay. We will not tolerate politicizing the protection of the people of Israel. As a member of the House Appropriations Committee, I'm honored to work with leaders like Hakeem Jeffries and Chairman Meeks to help ensure this year's inclusion of the full $3.8 billion in security assistance to Israel that became law. Every time we work on this bill and this funding, there's some pushback from both extremes. And we always have to remind people why it's important. Well, this weekend you saw more than ever why it is important, and we will continue to fight for those resources. So I will go back to Washington and work with the Biden-Harris administration to work with both Republican and Democrats and Chairman Meeks to make sure that we are supporting any additional military assistance and resources for Israel that comes to Congress in the coming days. So glad that President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu have been communicating and will continue to do so. I know that President Biden has pledged full support to Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu. And I call on all countries of the world to unequivocally condemn Hamas's brutal war on Israel. Lastly, we have been hearing reports that Americans are among those taken hostage in Gaza. Some of them may be New Yorkers, some of them may be our very own constituents here in Queens. And we are trying to find out the details as soon as possible to get them home because time is of the essence. We don't know what Hamas, the terrorists, will do to them. And we are praying for their safe return and also for the hundreds of thousands of Israeli men and women, many of whom are loved ones of our constituents here in New York, that will take place in the fighting to come over the coming days, weeks, and months. I want to say that I know our office, all of our offices have been working together because all weekend, and especially since last night when the holiday ended, we have been hearing from constituents who have loved ones in Israel who are trying to get home. There are airlines that have suspended their operations, who have canceled their flights, and we are trying to get them back as soon as possible. I have called on, and will do so in a bipartisan way, for the Department of State to provide charter planes or military planes to bring our people home. So Noam, I know you said that the Jewish community will continue to stand up and continue to show up. All of us as allies will continue to show up and to continue to stand with Israel as well.
Thank you, Congresswoman May. Our Consul General from Israel, Saksar.
So I prepared a speech, but I think that I'll speak from my heart, from my broken heart, because my homeland is burning, my homeland is bleeding, and my homeland is one of the closest allies of the United States. I'm full of gratitude to the support of American officials, the American people, community of the State of Israel. Because the atrocities that were committed against Israelis on Saturday, Jews and non-Jews, Israelis and Americans, were not just against them. They were against the free world. They were against... I was asked if what I think about the coverage of the media about the ongoing events in Israel. Well, there's not a question here, because the pictures, the horrible pictures, speak for themselves. Bodies are dragged miles from Israel to Gaza Strip. Women are raped after they were kidnapped. Whole families are taken to Gaza Strip. Mothers, elderly, carrying their grandchildren. This is a massacre. And Saturday morning, I see here some signs with the number 700 casualties, dead people. It's more than 1,000 now.
Wow.
It's the deadliest day of the history of the Jewish people since the Holocaust. So that's why my heart is broken. I thank you for being here, for supporting Israel, for supporting Israelis and the Jewish communities that have families there, that have relatives, that they keep a special place for Israel in their hearts and souls. I appreciate you coming here and standing up and calling up and saying what needs to be said. Never again.
Never again. Never again. Never
And I promise you, there's not going to be a retaliation. This is an unprecedented act that will be responded with an unprecedented response in order to make sure that these atrocities will never reoccur. And the goal is clear, is to cripple Hamas' will and capabilities permanently.
Yes, yes.
To do that.
Yes.
Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from the Speaker of the City Council, Adrienne Adams, and following her, our District Attorney, Melinda Katz.
Good afternoon, one and all.
Good afternoon.
We didn't want to be here today, but here we are. And I do want to thank you all for being here on this solemn day, a day that we should never have to endure as a borough or as a city. Yet it is needed to help our community heal after the tragic and devastating attack on Israel by Hamas over the weekend, which has led to further violence. You know, and as I stand here in this moment, I can't help but realize that over the past week, I was in no less than 3 celebratory events with Saksar, our Council General, where we celebrated holiday, beautiful, beautiful celebration of holiday, celebrating the joyous holiday of Sukkot with family, with friends, with neighbors. We broke bread together at the City Hall Sukkah, and we rejoiced in what it meant to come together as one community. And now to wake up. Now to wake up on Saturday morning to news of heinous attacks on innocent people in Israel at the end of a holiday, the start of Simchat Torah, and on the Sabbath, no less, is beyond heartbreaking. Our friends and colleagues woke up not knowing whether their loved ones abroad were safe, whether they were sound. The images that we are seeing of murder, kidnapping babies is unacceptable. And we stand here united to say we will not accept it. Escalating violence in the region is a cause of great concern and heartache because it only brings more death and destruction. Innocent civilians, women and children losing their lives, not acceptable. Violence creates pain and trauma, not okay. It tears apart families and communities while creating conditions that only allow cycles of hurt and division to continue, not okay. Today, though, we come together to denounce these horrific acts of violence, any and all violence inflicted upon civilians. Yes, we remember the victims who have been killed, injured, and harmed. And
You were just listening in there to officials in New York City provide an update to speak on this tragic events that happened in Israel over the weekend. A live picture right now into Tuesday as well as we're learning more information as the death toll continues to rise. We did see a glowing light there in the background just a few minutes ago as Israel increased airstrikes on the Gaza Strip and sealed it off from food, fuel, and other supplies on Monday in retaliation for that bloody incursion by Hamas militants as the war deaths rose to 1,600 on both sides. Hamas also escalated, pledging to kill captured Israelis if attacked targeted civilians without warning. I'm Andy Mack here on Live Now for Fox. Let's slide away for a quick 2-minute break.
hospitals now are lacking everything. They are lacking of medical supplies, absolutely. They are also lacking the electricity supply. All of the hospitals, electricity.
organization must support Israel in defeating Hamas. I want to thank President Biden for his I want to thank the people in Congress of the United States of America. In fighting Hamas, Israel is not only fighting for its own people, it is fighting for every country that stands against barbarism. Israel will win this war. And when Israel wins, the entire civilized world wins.
All right, you were just listening in there to the Prime Minister there calling Hamas savages and also vowing that they will win that war. Of course, also thanking President Biden as well. We did hear a statement from him saying that now 11 American citizens have been killed. I'm Andy Mack here on Live Now from Fox. Before we go to break, let's give you another live picture just past 12:30 local time there in Gaza City. As the lights are still on, but we're learning that in the Gaza Strip, Israeli have increased airstrikes sealed off from food, fuel, and other supplies on Monday in retaliation for those terrorist attacks. I'm Andy Mack. We'll be back after this.
Iran is the big puppet master, which is, in my opinion, has coordinated this whole thing.
U.S. officials, however, say they have not seen any evidence of Iran's involvement in the attacks. The Israeli government has now announced a complete siege of the Gaza Strip with no food or fuel allowed in. In Jerusalem, Greg Palcon, Fox News.
All right, thank you so much for that. Back here at home, cities throughout the U.S. are ramping up security around houses of worship after Hamas launched that surprise attack in Israel. It comes as the Biden administration ends more support to that region. For more on this, let's go on to Fox News Chief Washington correspondent Mike Emanuel, who has more.
Multiple Americans are dead and more are expected to be among the hostages held in Gaza. The U.S. has started moving the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group to the eastern Mediterranean to help Israel deter Hamas and Iranian-backed militias.
That they will have difficult decisions to make about how to conduct their operations, and we will support them in those.
The Biden administration must now try to understand how the U.S., its allies, and their intelligence operations missed Hamas preparing for the sophisticated and deadly attack, what the Israelis are calling their 9/11. White House officials are also rejecting Republican criticism that $6 billion the administration unfroze for Iran last month directly funded the violence.
Iran, they have created a highway from western Afghanistan all the way through Iraq, through portions of Syria, into Lebanon, and into Gaza, that they are funneling ammunition, weapons, fighters, advisors.
As tensions escalate, Israeli and Palestinian supporters are holding rallies across the U.S. Major cities, including Houston, Miami, and Washington, D.C., are also increasing security.
The more we explore, the more we can share. As long as I have my doubt, the Black Mermaid Foundation keeps moving. The dreaming keeps going.
Who has the latest from Washington, D.C.
We are in very, very grave danger of having a World War III.
It's a race for the White House being dominated by foreign affairs as the war in Ukraine rages on and Hamas militants launch the deadliest attack on Israel in decades.
This was an act of pure evil. I hope that Hamas is wiped off the face of the earth.
We will make sure that Israel has the resources to defend themselves.
2024 Republican presidential candidates denouncing the attacks on Israel on the campaign trail while taking aim at the current commander-in-chief.
Iran is a problem, and our federal government and Biden, they need to stop coddling a country that wants to see our country dead and wants to see Israel dead.
This is when the president has to send a very clear and unmistakable message to those folks around the world about what our response will be if Americans are further harmed.
Several in the GOP field suggest the Biden administration empowered the attack on Israel after unfreezing $6 billion in Iranian funds. But the White House says that money has not been spent.
I've dealt with Iran. They are playing a shell game. They're moving money around as we speak.
So far, more than 1,000 people have been killed by Hamas, the White House confirming the deaths of at least 9 Americans. The terrorist group is now threatening to execute hostages if Israel fights back with airstrikes in Gaza without forewarning.
I think we need to stand with Israel. I think we need to stand strongly.
The White House says President Biden will be speaking with several close allies about the latest developments in Israel this afternoon. In Washington, Rebecca Castor, Fox News.
All right, thank you so much, Rebecca, for that update as well. And we're learning more information, new statements coming in. This one from the former President Barack Obama. I do want to put up this on social media, on X. He says all Americans should be horrified and outraged by the brazen terrorist attacks on Israel and the slaughter of innocent civilians. We grieve for those who died, pray for the safe return of those who've been held hostage, and stand squarely alongside our ally Israel as it dismantles Hamas. As we support Israel's right to defend itself against terror, we must keep striving for a just and lasting peace for Israelis and Palestinians alike. I'm Andy Mack. We'll be back after this. All right, welcome back into Live Now from Fox. Andy Mack here. As you see two live pictures there, one around the world as it's just early morning hours as approaching 1 o'clock in the morning in Gaza City and Israel, and also the White House as well. Let's take you back out to Washington, D.C. earlier today as the former Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, now just a congressman after vacating that speakership with that motion, making some remarks as well in Washington. Let's listen in here to what he had to say on Live Now from Fox.
As many of you know, ever since I've been in Congress, I would lead a delegation to Israel every term. When I took over, I made sure it was bipartisan and joined with then leader Steny Hoyer. To get a clear understanding. As Speaker, my very first trip internationally was to Israel. I spoke at the Knesset in honor of the 75th anniversary of the creation of their country. At this moment in time, I think about what I said inside their chambers. I said, our values are your values. Our heritage is your heritage. Our dreams are your dreams. America is grateful for our friendship with Israel. We are a better nation because of it, and we must never shy away from defending it. Now is the time for action. America needs a 5-point plan to meet this moment, to help our ally Israel, and to strengthen our own future. The very first thing we need to do is rescue the American hostages. President Biden's #1 priority right now must be finding out how many Americans have been taken hostage and get them home. From last night to this morning, the number of American deaths have doubled from 4 to 9. This administration must also make clear that harming any American will result in the wrath of the United States. We cannot repeat what happened in Afghanistan. It must be clear that we do not negotiate with terrorists and no American will be left behind. Biden's policy on appeasement, including money for hostage deals, must come to an end. His policy has only emboldened terrorists. And handing over $6 billion to Iran only helps the cause. In explaining that to members of Congress, they said they had provisions to refreeze the money if Iran has done something wrong. They should freeze the money back today. Secondly, the leader of Hamas is reported to be sitting in a 5-star hotel cheering, watching women, children, grandparents being slaughtered and murdered in the streets. President Biden should demand his extradition now. Second, we must be there for our friend Israel. And what that means, it means action now. You see, I've been down to Gaza many times. I've sat next to the Iron Dome in a bipartisan group of members from both sides of the aisle. When we talked to those soldiers and asked them what they feared, is to be overwhelmed. See, a battery of an Iron Dome would go up and knock out a missile. It would first calculate where that missile was going and go next to it and knock it out. But it only has about 20 missiles at a time. We're watching 5,000 go. We always knew their plan was to build enough missiles to overwhelm, and that first set of missiles to be dumb missiles until you took out all the ability in the Iron Dome to knock them down. Then you send the precision-guided long-range missiles to go to larger populations. We need to resupply Israel where they have no doubt that they will ever be overwhelmed. Third, we must confront Iran. Hamas is Iran's proxy. They brag that they were helped by Iran to attack Israel. We must counter this new axis of power. It's an evil axis of Iran, Russia, and China. By building stronger coalitions across the Middle East, we must also expand the Abraham Accords to promote peace and freedom. 3 years ago, there was not war in Europe or in Israel, but today there is. The United States must reinstate the maximum pressure campaign against Iran. Refreezing the $6 billion is only the start. But under the last administration, Iran was only producing 400,000 barrels of oil a day. Now it's 3 million. They're making billions of dollars. If you look at the foreign currency reserves, 3 years ago, Iran had 4 billion. Today it's 70 billion. They are wealthier, richer, and stronger under this Biden administration, and they're using that wealth to fund terrorism, attacking our allies and killing Americans, and it must stop today. Sanctions should go on Iran's production of oil, and we should replace it with American energy. Unshackle the blessings that God has given America. Let us be energy independent to supply our allies. It will also be better for the environment. If we simply replaced Russian natural gas in Europe for 1 year, we would lower CO2 emissions by 200 million tons in 1 year. We must enforce harsher sanctions, cut off Iran's ability to export
all set to
oil,
offer their remarks. The air and atmosphere right now is calm and relaxed. Ali, though, there have been multiple confrontations in South Florida and the Tampa area
to ensure the safety and security of us here at home and our allies abroad. In the long term, we need to rebalance the power dynamics in the region, which means making America the energy powerhouse of the world. Fourth, we must focus on our own security. This just wasn't a failure in Israel on their intelligence community. It was ours as well. Why did we not know this was taking? Why do we have a Secretary of State who says he has no knowledge if Iran wasn't involved? He has less knowledge than the Wall Street Journal of meetings in Beirut and others, of a sophisticated plans going on for months. In an own Twitter notice of more than 40 days ago of Hamas telling us, preparing for war. In looking at our own intelligent failures, we have to look to our border. In 2019, there was 0 arrests of people on the FBI terrorist watch list trying to come across our border. Just in this year alone, there's 151 from 160 different countries. In my own state, we caught 2 coming from Yemen on the terrorist watch list, from China and others. Why are they coming to America? What do they have planned? And who are they communicating with? President Biden has said previously that he believes the #1 threat to America is facing is climate change. That is not true. The #1 threat killing Americans is terrorism. The #1 threat is an open border. The #1 threat is weakening our economic power by lowering our ability to produce our own energy. Our #1 threat is appeasement and funding Iran. Our #1 threat is letting the buildup of the axis of the evil power of Iran, Russia, and China. Rather focus on his Green New Deal, he should focus on protecting the American people. We need an immediate assessment of our own areas of weakness and a glaring weakness in our own southern border. We know that individuals on the terrorist watch list has crossed Biden's open border. Who are these people? Who are they in contact with? And what are their plans to here in America? Fifth, as we look inward, we must confront anti-Semitism in the United States. To every single president of a college and university, do not sit back. Do not let anti-Semitism grow. Confront it and deny it. Condemn it. And the anti-Semitism here in this House, saying no comment is not leadership. Allowing elected members of this body to speak anti-Semitism and not condemn it, is wrong. To avoid it is wrong. As Speaker, I watched a member on the other side of the aisle try to reserve a building in here to celebrate anti-Semitism. I removed it. I removed a member from Foreign Affairs based upon anti-Semitism. I watched others yesterday continue those remarks. I watched the leadership on the other side say no comment. Have we not learned anything from history? Have we not understand the moment in life we are living? Do we not realize that weakening America strengthens our enemies? Allowing Iran to produce more oil, appeasement, paying ransoms for American hostages has only made us weaker on the world stage. These 5 actions must be taken now. And to the President, turn off the barbecue and speak to the American people. Be the leader the world is looking for. Otherwise, the world will stay unsafe. With that, I'll take some questions. Yes.
Given the crisis overseas, there's been a lot of focus on paralysis here in the House. Over the weekend, several of their members even called for you to be reinstated as Speaker. Do you envision any scenario in which you could be a candidate for Speaker, especially if there's a deadlock in this race?
Look, this is about a moment in time. This is about what America's going to do. Could you imagine if we were sitting here and we listened further to a Gates and Mace, that we were in a shutdown? That as we asked our 30,000 men and women in the military in the Middle East to defend us without being paid? That the question around the world of what was happening here today, that's a decision by the conference. I'll allow the conference to make whatever decision. Whether I'm speaker or not, I'm a member of this body. I know what history has had, and I can lead in any position it is. And right now, I realize we need these 5 actions taken now and stop delaying. Yes.
What action can or should the House take this week? Obviously, there is a question of whether it can pass a resolution or there is a pro-tempore speaker elected quickly. What can the
Unfortunately, the House can do nothing without a speaker. I could be upset with 8, but I could be upset with every single Democrat as well. They both made the same decision, a political decision, instead of putting America first. And so you have to finish the speaker, or I know this is new territory. It was created after 9/11. I don't understand why the Speaker Pro Tem couldn't lead as well. We should have a resolution on the floor condemning what's taken place so the rest of the world understands. We should supply and make sure that there's no question and no doubt that Israel will never be overwhelmed when it comes to ammunition. That if they decide to send the precision-guided missiles, that they will be knocked down. We should send no doubt to anyone that holds an American citizen that we will not leave without them. This will not be Afghanistan. We will not allow this administration to do this again. Yes.
What would you tell your colleagues to do in this state of paralysis? Would you tell them elect the pro tempore speaker and McHenry and buy themselves time? I mean, to do that resolution, you need something.
I'm going to allow the conference to do their work, but the one thing I would ask my conference, you have 96% of the conference in one place, and you're allowing 4% with the Democrats playing politics that now are putting a doubt inside this body. That is wrong.
Speaker, I mean, what do you make of, you talked about Iran as being part of this axis of evil, the reports of Iranian assets basically infiltrating the Biden administration. Do you see that as playing a role in the intelligence failures?
I see an overwhelming intelligence failure, but understand what transpired from one administration to the next. The very first day of the Biden administration, they moved towards appeasement. Iran, economically, their regime was in trouble. $4 billion in reserves, $70 billion today. 400,000 barrels being produced to 3 million today. Look at the price of oil as well, as this Biden administration attacks our own ability to produce. But watch what else happened. The shift to now start paying ransom for Americans, so more were captured. The $6 billion, but it wasn't just the $6 billion, it's the production of oil as well. It's every movement they have taken. And what does it mean when you move towards Iran? Our allies wondered whether we'd be there. Then look at the next decision, what he did in Afghanistan. It made our closest of allies move to China. It allowed China to enter the Middle East, to bring Saudi Arabia and Iran together. He criticizes Saudi Arabia but praises Iran. Then he moves our intelligence to the #1 priority being climate change. However important we understand climate change to be, it's not the #1 issue of the intelligence community. This is a colossal failure. And then to open up our borders, knowingly what's coming across, to allow a secretary to tell you the border is secure when nobody can ever look at you in the straight face and believe that. You have 151 people on the terrorist watch list that were arrested. Do you know how difficult it is to get on that list from the FBI? But in 2019, the number was 0. Iran is stronger, more financially secure, and utilizing that resources to fund terrorism around the world. Killing Americans, taking hostages of Americans. Put it in perspective. 9 Americans died so far that we know. 800 Israeli deaths of a population of 9 million. If that was to happen on American soil, based upon what's coming across this southern border, that's the equivalent of 30,000 Americans being murdered and slaughtered. So what we should be doing and what he should be doing right now, President Biden, is securing the support of every other nation around the world for Israel to defend themselves. This will not be a short endeavor. Just as ISIS was our #1 priority to remove.
All right, Andrew Kraft here now in the anchor chair, 6 p.m. there in Washington and 3 o'clock here in the afternoon on the West Coast. You've been listening there to former Speaker of the House, now Congressman Kevin McCarthy, making remarks on the conflict there in Israel between Hamas. I just want to note this, too, because there's some political considerations at play with McCarthy, and I think this is interesting. Chad Pergram notes this, that McCarthy's remarks today on the Mideast are part of a campaign potentially to retake the speakership. So that's quite interesting. He goes on to say, highlighting his foreign policy bona fides and declaring what the U.S. should do. This comes amid, the speaker fight playing out on Capitol Hill between Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan. We're learning, remember we brought you the news just last week that former President Trump was coming to Capitol Hill sometime this week. That's now off due to the ongoing war in Israel. Of course, Trump had endorsed Jim Jordan. It still remains to be seen whether Scalise or Jordan can get that magic number of 218 votes and what the timeline is going to look like for the next speaker election there on the House floor, because that is, and you've been hearing from House Republicans, somewhat hamstringing the House Republican conference to come out full-throatedly and denounce the war there in Israel and possibly to pass some type of resolution condemning Hamas's actions. So we'll just have to keep an eye on the space there in Capitol Hill. In the meantime, let's just show you right now what we are looking at this moment. We're approaching now, going into an early Tuesday morning there in Gaza, in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv. Right now, it's about 1 in the morning there on a very early Tuesday morning. We have these pictures right now. This here, I believe that's over Jerusalem, and this looking into Gaza City, where at this very moment, as we speak, the Israeli Defense Force is striking targets within Gaza, Hamas targets there. Let's take it back stateside if we can, very, very briefly. We have 2 live events happening in the Northeast. You have this one in Philadelphia. Take a look at this. This is a pro-Israeli rally there. You can see so many of the Jewish faith coming out in Philadelphia to show solidarity with their fellow Israelis, fellow Israeli Americans. But on the flip side of that, we're also seeing some of these rallies and events take place here stateside and in North America, rallying together for the pro-Palestinian cause. And they're quite controversial, if I may say that. We have this one here as well. This is happening in New Jersey. You can see some of our Fox 5 New York folks are there as well, with some of these speakers coming out and condemning the actions Hamas has taken in Israel. And we're going to be kind of pinpointing, highlighting some of these distinctions, contradictions throughout the evening here as we continue to follow this major international headline. I want to put this tweet up. We're hearing from President Biden in written form only today, not on camera. Here is what he just tweeted. He said, "In this moment of heartbreak, the American people stand shoulder to shoulder with Israelis." Of course, this comes after he just put out a statement confirming that at least 11 Americans were killed in the attacks on Saturday morning. The most number of those who practice the Jewish faith killed in a single day since the Holocaust during World War II. In the meantime, let's just get an update from down on the ground there from Greg Palcott.
The Israeli military strengthening its power at the border with Gaza, this as the battle with Hamas militants is in its 3rd day.
We have only started striking Hamas. What we will do to our enemies in the coming days will reverberate with them for generations.
Over the weekend, Terrorists stunned the country and the world with a coordinated surprise attack on southern Israel. Hundreds of people were killed, including several Americans.
I can't begin to tell you how shocked and traumatized the country is.
Complicating operations for Israelis are the hostages taken by Hamas.
A conversation about the hostages, about the cessation of hostilities, and about what happens next, because it's going to have to end. This can't sort of continue. It'll be an asymmetric war that could go on for a long time. Turkey, Qatar, other countries have said we're prepared to play a role in mediating or negotiating. Tempers are very, very hot right now. Emotions are very high. It doesn't feel like something that's about to happen, but that's got to be the next step, because there are a lot of people dying on both sides of this thing, and people tell me that they have not felt this degree of tension and fear in Israel since 1973.
Ali Velshi, we're glad to have you there live for us in the region. Let's get to Raf Sanchez now with more on those family members desperate to hear anything from their loved ones taken hostage.
Literally, in the last minute or so, we have been watching the Iron Dome interceptor missiles just lighting up the night sky as yet more rockets continue to fly out of Gaza. I want to update you on some news breaking. We have a new audio statement from the spokesman for the so-called military wing of Hamas. And in this statement, Abu Obaida is his name. He says Hamas will begin executing an Israeli civilian captive in return for any new Israeli bombing of civilian houses inside Gaza without pre-warning. This is the first time that Hamas has explicitly threatened to execute hostages inside of Gaza. It has obviously been implied. It has been what the world expected, given the absolute carnage that they wreaked inside of Israel. But this is the first explicit threat from Hamas that they will begin killing the Israeli civilians that they have in their captivity if Israel bombs any civilian housing inside Gaza without pre-warning. Now, that is a chilling message for the families all across Israel tonight who are desperately seeking news of their loved ones being held captive inside Gaza. I spoke earlier to a man named Yoni Asher. His wife, his two young daughters, aged 3 and 5, were visiting their grandmother's house. In order to secure the freedom of his family. That is a deal that he would take in an instant, and it is something we're hearing again and again from families all across Israel tonight.
Raf Sanchez, thank you for that reporting. President Biden working the phones today with top administration officials saying they're working to try to get more details to the families of the 11 Americans now confirmed to have been killed in this invasion. The White House releasing some photos. You see the president there. They're saying he's been on the phone talking with Prime Minister Netanyahu, talking with allies, talking with his cabinet officials, obviously. His top national security team, as this moment has clearly been emotional, even for the White House's national security spokesperson.
There's been a lot of death and destruction in that region, but I've never seen anything like this.
I'm sorry. It's very, excuse me, very difficult to look at these images, Jake, and the human cost. And these are human beings. They're family members, they're friends, they're loved ones, cousins, brothers, sisters. Yeah, it's difficult.
I want to bring in Monica Alba, who is live for us outside the White House here. So, Monica, there are a lot of threads to pull on here, including this new joint statement that is just into us in the last 45 minutes or so from key allies condemning this attack by Hamas.
Across the board, Hallie, and this is a lot of the diplomatic coordination that is happening behind the scenes today. We did see President Biden and the White House issuing this statement just moments ago, condemning the atrocities committed by Hamas, saying there from the countries of France, Germany, Italy, the UK, and the United States that we make clear that the terrorist actions of Hamas have no justification, no legitimacy, and must be universally condemned. So clearly, this is something that President Biden has been on the phone with allies about, that many in his administration are on the phone constantly all day today with their counterparts. And they're also all working to learn more details about Americans who may be potentially held hostage there by Hamas. There are questions even about how many or whether this is even the case, and it is just too soon to say, the U.S. says, what we know about this. And so far, 11 Americans have been confirmed to have lost their lives in these attacks, and it's possible that number could go up. So there's also a lot of conversation right now between the White House, the State Department, and American families who are seeking more information about their loved ones and about some who are still missing and unaccounted for, who may be among the injured and who we just don't have enough information about. So tonight, the White House is actually going to be lit up in white and blue, the colors of the Israeli flag. You can see it behind me. In a couple of minutes during your hour, Hallie, we expect that that will be lit up in solidarity with Israel, a message that the president in the last couple of days has been completely clear and staunch on, and that we can expect him to continue to be, as they really are just evaluating, monitoring this hour by hour. But that show of support and solidarity from allies, the clearest indication that this is something the United States is being very clear on their position on tonight here. Hallie.
There's also this question of how the U.S. can help Israel as it relates to this hostage crisis that is happening as we speak. We know that the sharing of information, at least the sort of coordination between U.S. intel officials and their Israeli counterparts, is going to be happening. Do we know anything else about interactions with, let's say, the families of these 11 Americans that the president says has been killed in this conflict?
Yeah, we know behind the scenes that there are these conversations, there are ongoing contacts. There were some families who were pleading with the U.S. government for information. There are some families who, of course, are exceptionally private about this and don't want their names out there, as they just are trying to get a little bit more information. But this really just shows you the scope. And many of these citizens, we believe, Hallie, are dual citizens. So these are American and Israeli citizens who maybe were born here, grew up here, went to Israel to work or to serve, or who have been going back and forth between the two countries. And of course, again, we're just seeing that complete solidarity from the perspective of the White House, from the Empire State Building on down, and everything that you're seeing in the U.S. pointing to that. And President Biden, though he wasn't in front of cameras today, is making his message clear off camera. Hallie.
Monica Alba, thank you very much. New reporting from our team now late tonight on what else the U.S. wants to send to Israel, not just its support, but munitions, air defenses. That is already happening as the U.S. is surging that aid overseas. I want to bring in Courtney Kube, who's live for us at the Pentagon. So we've been talking about this sort of the message that the U.S. wants to send to others in the region as well by moving apparatus closer to Israel. Talk us through it and what we should know.
Yeah, so that's really the big message here, is this is about projecting power, in addition to showing that the U.S. is moving a tremendous amount of firepower and manpower to the Eastern Mediterranean as a show of support to Israel. But you mentioned who this might be really messaging to. It's not just about messaging to Hamas that the U.S. has the ability to surge this kind of to the aircraft carrier and the supporting ships and all the personnel and all the aircraft. This is also about messaging the groups who may be supporting Hamas. We've been hearing a lot about Iran over the last several days since this assault first began. That is because there has been this long-standing relationship between Hamas and Iran. Iran has provided training. They've provided equipping. They have worked with Hamas for years, supporting Hamas. So the big question has been, was Iran in any way directly related to this attack? Now, according to U.S. officials who we've spoken with, and we have asked a lot of them, Hallie, they are not aware of any direct link, but they do continue to point to this long-standing, years-long relationship between Hamas and Iran. Now, on the issue of this assault, we heard from a senior defense official today about just how brutal this assault was. We've been seeing some really difficult video, photos, hearing just heart-wrenching stories from people whose family members have been killed or taken hostage. We heard from a senior defense official today who talked a little bit about exactly the sorts of tactics that were used. And this official said that this is ISIS-level savagery that we have seen committed against Israeli civilians. Houses burned to the ground, young people massacred at music festivals, and we are also making very clear to adversaries or those that might be entertaining entering this conflict to escalate it. They should think twice and not take advantage of this instability. That's that messaging piece here, Hallie. It is messaging to people who may be looking to expand this outside of Gaza and Israel.
There's also the thing, the question that comes up, right, and the thing that will be investigated, I think, for weeks, months, years to come is, was this and how was this such a potential intelligence failure, given that the Israelis have just a highly regarded military and intelligence apparatus in place?
And it's not just the really, frankly, exquisite intelligence collection capabilities that they have, and it's very extensive. Their network in that area is known. It's known to be extensive and pervasive through the area. It's not just that, though. It's also some simple questions like there was a border fence there, a border fence that is it's strong, it has sensors, it has cameras, it has defense capabilities, it has all of these things, and yet Hamas and these fighters were not able to breach it in one, but multiple locations all at the same time. It was this coordinated attack, multi-pronged attack, and it was all timed together. Also, these fighters who went into those areas with these civilians, they seemed to be very highly trained, and they were also coordinated in the way that they were going house to house. So all of that put together, and when you have just the magnitude of the number of fighters who went across the border into Israel, that's one of the reasons that officials are just so confused about how none of this was able to get out. The number of people, the level of planning involved, that's why people are so surprised that it was able to. Intelligence agencies just did not know it was coming, Hallie.
Courtney Kuby, live for us at the Pentagon. Yeoman's work from you.
There's a lot of political considerations, which is, does the U.S. want to have force, boots on the ground involved in this conflict? So that's going to be another consideration.
All right, and we have, Hal, just some looks up there. This one in the lower right in New York, prominent Jewish leaders coming out condemning the attack there perpetrated by Hamas. We also, above that, have just a live vantage point. I know it's nighttime there, but over Gaza City, you and I were speaking on Saturday night. We were seeing some of the missile strikes and the Iron Dome interceptors play out in the night. I wanted to make sure we put this map up here because these were the Hamas attacks in Israel. And help us geographically make sense of this, because the IDF over the weekend said more than 1,000 Hamas fighters came in through land, sea, and air up through southern Israel, and you can see each and every location where they struck, the attack points, if you will. Help us make sense, because a lot of people are comparing this, to our southern border. There is a wall there. They've spent a lot of resources and federal funding to build that, what once was called an impenetrable wall at the southern border and on the Gaza Strip border as well. Help us make sense of that, if you can, because it's for people who have not been to Israel, who have not seen that, the infrastructure is very, very heavy there, right?
It is very heavy. It's a very significant wall. It's completely observed. I mean, there's cameras, there's everything out there that watches that wall. There's forces out there. They patrol the wall constantly. They just have a lot of capabilities that are there. What we know about the wall, what we know about the what happened was that they used heavy equipment to breach the wall in key places. So the wall was there, but literally there would be heavy equipment that would go in and push the wall down. And they would basically make a breach in the wall, and then they'd rush in, and it was just through sheer mass. I mean, you had over 1,000 Hamas fighters, terrorists, if you will, that just rushed in there. It looks like they were extremely well organized. They went directly to certain areas, and that's what really kind of jumped out at me. Is it looked like they had this. It wasn't just they went through the wall and they tried to do whatever they could do. It looked like they had this very well mapped out as far as where they were going to go, which streets, which villages, which kibbutz. I have no doubt that they knew all about that music festival, and took advantage of a lot of people being there as a potential for what became a horrendous mass casualty attack. So they had all this planning and preparation.
All right, it does look like, unfortunately, we do keep losing Hal Kempfer there with his shot as it kind of freezes in there. In the meantime, we do have a live event going on in New York. We're watching New York City Mayor Eric Adams there. Take a look at this as he is lighting some candles there. The candles shaped in the image of the Star of David. Let's just watch.
Well, you go? So. Yeah, when.
Walk back towards Israel. Now, imagine Avital's feeling when she's instructed to go back with her, back in front of the terrorists that kidnapped her, and she didn't know if they want to execute her. She didn't know what happened, but all she knew that she needs to start walking. So she took the baby Negev, a 4-year-old baby, and Eshel, a 4.5-month-old baby. She took them on her back. The 4-year-old Negev was shot in his leg, so he couldn't walk. They dressed her so she would be modest. So she used one of the dresses as a baby carrier, so she could carry both of them. And she walked for miles. We don't know how long. We know it was for hours. During that time, she encountered another group of terrorists. She hid behind the sand hill so they wouldn't notice her. And after a long time, she got to the fence. She crawled under it to find safety with another survivor. And the next thing we know is that around 1:30, their father, Adi's husband, who was in another village outside of Cholit, he wasn't with them. Around 1 o'clock at night, he managed to see his children for the first time in so many hours.
And that is a 4-year-old and a 4-month-old. And you said the 4-year-old was shot in the leg. How are the babies, how are the kids doing tonight?
I spent the entire day yesterday with them in the hospital. They were injured all over their faces from shattered. Negev was shot, so we operated him to take the bullet out. His leg was broken because of it. And Eshel, the 4.5-year-old baby, he was inhaling gunpowder and smoke and fumes to his lungs. So his right lung was damaged, and they had to hospitalize him to monitor his level of gases that were in his blood, because they were afraid his ability to breathe is damaged.
שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד, תציל את כל החיילים שיצאו למלחמה נגד עזה, אמן.
Okay, so Andrew Kraft back here. You are watching this in New York right now. New York City Mayor Eric Adams alongside prominent Jewish leaders in the Big Apple, and you saw some New York congressmen, I believe, as well. Daniel Goldman there, also the head of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt there. We'll be speaking to him later. But look at all of the people coming out there in New York City, laying down white roses, lighting these white candles that are fixed there in the shape of the Star of David, of course. That is also emblazoned on the Israeli flag in the colors of blue and white. So very, very moving scenes there at the moment. We also have a similar solidarity rally happening in Philadelphia as well at this moment. Let's just keep listening to this in New York. Oh, Eric Adams, he's going to be speaking. Let's listen.
Lawmakers, both Congressman Goldman and Congressman Meeks, and I don't know if we have any other congressional delegations. Can we just have a moment of silence and just really a moment of reflection of the lives lost and the family members who are still going through the uncertainty
may have been taken into the Gaza Strip. And once we have spoken to all families and everyone is informed, we will be able to calculate our steps going forward. Of course, considering the fact that there are Israeli hostages inside the Gaza Strip, as always, Israel is holding human life sacred.
This is a shocking outrage against the state of Israel, viewers. What you're seeing are innocents. They are not people associated with the state of Israel, and they don't deserve to have been treated like that. We've been all victims here in India of Islamist terror, viewers. We've seen it in 26/7. Lieutenant, my final question to you before I let you go. What if the Hamas tomorrow were to ask you for a prisoner or hostage exchange? What would happen?
I would leave that question to the political echelon. I think that they have all the information they need. But this is an unprecedented attack on Israel, and this is the largest number of Jewish people killed in a single day since the end of the Holocaust. This unprecedented attack calls for an unprecedented response, and I believe our politicians are aware of that and will give, in accordance, their orders to the army.
Well, India's best wishes to the state of Israel. Thank you very much, Lieutenant, for speaking to me. I'm going to go across now to Mustafa Barghouti. Mr. Barghouti, I want to ask you a straightforward question. Many nations have described the Hamas offensive as a terror attack. What is your response to this?
No, it's not. And you can't call people who are struggling for their freedom from occupation and the system of oppression. The real terrorists are the Israeli illegal settlers who are illegally settling on the Palestinian occupied territories and conducting settlers' terror against Palestinians. During the last 8 months, they and the Israeli army have killed no less than 248 Palestinians, including 40 children. One of them was only 2.5 years old. And at the same time, Netanyahu stood up in the United Nations carrying the map of Israel, which would annex the occupied territories in a serious violation of international law, including West Bank, Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. In addition to that, Gaza has been under siege, without electricity, without cleaning water, without drinkable water, and people have been in terrible poverty to the level that patients with cancer, most of them were prevented from leaving Gaza to get treatment in the West Bank. It was a terrible, intolerable situation. And on top of that, Mr. Netanyahu declared that he's going to liquidate the Palestinian issue through normalization with Arab countries. This is the main reason why you have this situation today.
Isn't it true that one of the reasons we have this situation today is that so-called peaceful Palestinians voted for the Hamas that has a charter that basically calls for the annihilation of all Jews, Mr. Barghouti?
No. Actually, only 1/3 of Palestinians would vote for Hamas. But the majority of Palestinians vote to other parties. And it is not true that to say that if we have elections tomorrow, the majority will vote for Hamas. In most recent polls, Hamas will not get majority and Fatah will not get majority. And we in the middle, the democratic parties, will get the rest.
No, that's what you
so
say.
What we want,
hypothetically.
Yeah. So it's not true to say that.
You're saying this hypothetically, sir. The Hamas charter makes a number of disturbing proclamations. Let me read out a couple to you. It says Israel will exist and continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it. This is an open invite to genocide, sir. Then it goes on to say the day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight the Jews. When the Jews will hide behind the stones and trees will say, "O Muslims, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him." This is what it is saying. Now, do you think Palestinians should be supporting these mission statements? Would you support this?
Let me tell you what the Israeli finance minister in the Netanyahu government said publicly. He called himself a fascist homophobe. He also said that that Israel should fill the Palestinian territory with settlements and settlers so that Palestinians would lose all hope of having a state of their own. And he also said that at that time, Palestinians will have one of three options, either to immigrate or to accept a life of subjugation to Israeli apartheid or die. That's the Israeli minister. You're talking about texts. I don't know where you got it from. I am telling
are you saying that the Hamas charter doesn't say this?
Speech of Smotrich, who is an Israeli settler and who is
Sir,
a
you
minister
can
of
draw
finance
that.
in Israel.
Is that Israeli
and
state
Netanyahu
policy?
never
No.
negated that.
It might be the view of one individual. It is not Israeli state policy, sir. Are you saying that the Hamas charter doesn't say any of this? That I'm misleading the public?
I am not Hamas. I'm not
well.
responsible for what
Well,
you say.
sir.
I'm not
Well,
Hamas. I
well,
am
sir,
a
you sit
leader
in the
of a
Legislative
democratic
Assembly,
party
you
in
should know.
Palestine, which is not Fatah, not Hamas.
Okay, I'll leave it at that, sir. I'll leave it at that. Viewers, no clear answer there. No clear answer. Coming up, the right stand. Don't go away. Let me go across to Mr. Amit Halevi. Mr. Amit Halevi, thank you for speaking to CNN News 18. Simple, straightforward question to you. There are many people who are saying today, especially those who speak on behalf of Palestine, that Israel has invited this action upon itself because of its own policies. How do you respond to them, sir?
I think that you just a few minutes ago said very important and very clear things regarding the Hamas charter. And as you recommended to your viewers, I'm just, I'm joining to your recommendation. Just go and read the Hamas charter. I don't think you will ask this question again. I mean, they don't need any excuse in order to attack Israel or the Jewish people or the Western world, because the goal of the Hamas, as it's written, black and white, not something very complicated, is to take over the whole world and of course destroying Israel. So we have business here with with animals, actually, not a really human being, human animals. And what we saw here in the yesterday and day before is exactly what is been written in the Hamas charter, and that's something that Israel cannot afford itself. And I'm saying to you in this respectable channel that Israel will not long enable this terror organization in the land of Israel and nearby our cities and population. So the end of this
Mr.
war,
Halevi, 120,000, it's estimated, people have been dislocated from their places, Gazians. What happens next? Your government has decided now to switch off water, electricity, etc. Are these people just going to be left now to perhaps die of thirst, or what happens to them? How long will this go on? What is the next step?
I think that the goal of all of this war, yes, it's not operation, it's actually war, should be that Hamas will not be the governor of this area. We need to finish this operation, this war, with one simple fact. Hamas should not be anymore in the Gaza Strip. Never mind if it's 1,000, 2,000, 20,000 or 30,000 soldiers of Hamas should be, or they will be die, or they will be out of the Gaza Strip. We did it once upon a time, as you know, with Arafat in Lebanon. We should do it here, because this model, when we enabled over the years to Hamas or to Hezbollah or to any other organization to get in a space when we left it, and the results are very clear, and we saw these monsters become big. And as I said, they have a religion vision, Raul. They have a religion goals, and in my eyes, yes, they are not presenting religion. Yes, they are actually infidel. I want to say to Ahmed in your panel that actually they are desecrating God and any religion. Yes, this is not religion. We just 3 years ago, we signed on the Abraham Accords, which actually brought inside the political agreements our forefather Abraham, which presents the justice, the morality, the truth. That's our way. That is Israel way. And the Muslim world must take the decision if they go in the Hamas and the evil and the terror way or in Abraham way. And that's why these are not religious people. These
Okay.
are infidel people.
Amit Halevi, thank you very much for speaking to me. We are going to obviously talk to you over the next few days and get a sense of how this story is developing, how this war is progressing. So do make time and come back on CNN News 18. We would love to have you and listen to you.
This is a decision of the Minister of Defense. There are different time estimates to how long is that viable for, but it is important to remember the context of this attack. I am seeing that you're showing right now images of buildings falling in Gaza. Where are the images of 4-month-old babies that have been kidnapped into the Gaza Strip? Where are the images of young girls being raped and paraded on the street?
Led by the Democratic Socialists of America gathered in Times Square over the weekend. You might have seen some of those videos. But in the meantime, we do want to let you listen in to Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, the Democrat. He's speaking at one of these pro-Israeli rallies. Let's listen.
Thank Federation for organizing this important event. Most importantly, I want to thank all of you for being here this evening. I'm proud to be joined tonight by leaders in my administration, along with two of our children, and my wife, Lori, our First Lady here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Lori and I are inspired by your presence here this evening. And I know that we are all joined by thousands of Pennsylvanians rallying in different cities and towns all across this Commonwealth this week in places like Pittsburgh and Scranton, State College and Allentown. But your presence here tonight in Lower Merion and those demonstrated supporters all across this Commonwealth send a strong message throughout our Commonwealth and our country that we stand against terror and we stand with Israel. I know that being here feels personal. For each of us, Israel means something special. It's a place where we have made friends and where we've spent meaningful time. I know that right now so many of us are worried about those friends and the family, loved ones that are there right now, those who now live in a war zone, and those who we are trying to help bring home. Or Israel is a place where you've never been, but you recognize its critical role in the world. And you recognize what Israel represents: freedom, democracy, and peace. Peace. Those are values that we as Americans and we as Pennsylvanians hold dear. You know, we gather here tonight in this Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, not far from where William Penn arrived just 341 years ago, with a vision to build a colony built on the promise of religious tolerance and understanding. Today, 3.5 centuries later, I am honored to address you tonight both as the 48th governor of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and as a proud American Jew. I want you to know that every day, Lori and I are humbled by this honor that the Commonwealth has given us to serve as its first family and live in the governor's residence. It is there that we gathered about a week ago with hundreds from the broader community to celebrate Sukkot, in the first sukkah built on the grounds of the governor's residence in our state capital. Now, while that joy has obviously given way to sadness and profound anger, I share that with you because this is a moment not to retreat from who we are, but to embrace who we are. This is a moment for all of us to be proud of who we are, and I want you to know I certainly am. It's also a moment to be welcoming to others, welcoming as Penn was to others, and to be tolerant and accepting of others' differences. I'm inspired as I look out in this crowd today that there are people who look like me, who are proud American Jews, and I'm proud to look out in this crowd and recognize there are people who don't look like me, who don't worship like me, but who have come together tonight in the spirit of Penn to lift up their voices against hate and terror and violence. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. Because this is a moment that calls on each and every one of us to speak and act with moral clarity. We must condemn the horrific acts of war perpetrated by Hamas and their enablers. Yes, of course, hundreds of Israelis are among the dead and captured. But so are American citizens, as well as British and French, Canadian, Mexican, and so many other nationalities. You see, this is truly an international time of mourning. And these unprovoked attacks on innocent civilians warrant condemnation here in America and all across our globe. But sadly, as we have seen, that is not the case everywhere. So let me speak some truth. There is no moral equivalency between Hamas, a foreign terrorist organization as designated by the United States, and Israel, the only pluralistic, functioning democracy in the Middle East. There is no moral equivalency. Hamas is hell-bent on destroying Israel and ridding the region of Jews. They do not seek lasting peace, and they do not seek lasting compromise. Instead, they have launched an unprovoked and unjustified attack against Israel and its people. Taking innocent civilians hostage is terrorism. Killing peaceful concert goers or families.
All right, so Pennsylvania Governor there, Josh Shapiro, also saying that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania will stand with Israel. And so you're hearing from so many across the United States with similar rallies like this today. Let's go to a quick commercial break. Before we do just that, live now look at the White House. It's about, well, it's almost 7 o'clock there on the East Coast. I want to put up this tweet from Fox News White House correspondent Jackie Heinrich. She says this: POTUS will give remarks tomorrow evening regarding Israeli terror attacks. And tonight, the White House will be lit up with colors of the Israeli flag in solidarity. Also, we're getting just some more updates from Jackie on the timing of this. It will be at 1 p.m. Eastern, the remarks from Biden. He will speak tomorrow on Israel, on the Israel terror attacks. And so remember, we did hear from him very, very briefly over the weekend from the White House. He was flanked by Secretary of State Antony Blinken. It was about 3.5 minutes of remarks there. That was over the weekend, and now we're going to hear from him on camera tomorrow. Biden also tweets this: I affirm to Prime Minister Netanyahu that the United States will continue to make sure Israel has what it needs to defend itself and its people. And throughout the evening, we'll be bringing on experts to talk about what that means, what Israel does need from the United States to defend itself, what has gotten already and so much more. In the meantime, let's take a quick commercial break, though. When we come back, we'll be diving into how now the war in Israel is shaking up the 2024 GOP presidential primary. We know some of these candidates are commenting about the attacks in Israel. We'll have a report on that from New Hampshire when we come back. And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. Thanks so much for being with us. Well, the deadly attack on Israel is having an impact on the campaign trail. Republican presidential candidates are weighing in on the White House's foreign policy. Let's go out now to one of those early primary states, New Hampshire, Concord. That's where Fox's Kaylee Schuyler is standing by. She joins me. Kaylee, thanks so much for being with us. I know a lot of candidates, they were in Iowa over the weekend, some in New Hampshire today, and they're talking about the attacks in Israel, are they not?
That's right, Andrew. Today, here in New Hampshire, former President Donald Trump says that he stands strongly with Israel and that if he is elected on President Day 1, he will cut off money to terrorists. He also said he would reimpose a travel ban on countries that are tied to terrorism.
We are in very, very grave danger of having a World War III. And this will be a war of obliteration. This will not be a war with, I say, army tanks going back and forth shooting at each other. This is the real deal.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says if he is elected, the United States will have a strong relationship with Israel and will make sure Hamas is not capable of something like this again. Former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley says Hamas is bloodthirsty and determined to kill as many innocent lives as possible. Haley had a message for the Israeli Prime Minister to, quote, finish them. Many candidates have criticized the Biden administration after an agreement to unfreeze $6 billion in Iranian assets in exchange for 5 American hostages. GOP candidates claim the swap encouraged the Iranians to further support Hamas, but the Biden administration says the assets from the deal will only be used for humanitarian aid. Political experts here in New Hampshire say the war in Israel will have an impact on GOP primary voters.
The long historic support of the United States for Israel by both parties is going to be something that keeps most of the Republicans lined up. I think what you're going to see is which candidates can point to their own personal experience in dealing with these issues to make some gains on this issue.
In a statement, President Joe Biden said the United States will not fail to back Israel and will make sure the citizens have the help that they need. Back to you, Andrew.
You know, Kayla, you're in an early state there in New Hampshire. They're going to be voting next year very early. Are you hearing from New Hampshire residents? Are they talking about the war in Israel now? I know there's so many domestic issues going on here with the economy, with immigration, but I don't know how long you've been on the ground there. Are you hearing that now from voters? They're concerned about this?
Yeah, what I've heard so far, actually, there's a little bit of confusion amongst voters. There's the war in Ukraine, now in Israel, but also our government almost shut down not too long ago. So voters here have been saying they want to make sure to help others out, but also they want to make sure that we take care of our own business here in the United States.
Yeah, so interesting. A lot happening on the world stage. Kaylee Schuyler there in Concord, New Hampshire. Talk soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, in the meantime, we just wanted to make sure we got that in as well because, like Kaylee said in her reporting, the now war in Israel is impacting the 2024 GOP primary contest. Also, on the other side, remember there are some other Democrats who are trying to, topple incumbent President Joe Biden in what could look like a Democratic primary. Of course, you've heard the name Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Today, he held an event saying that he is no longer running as a Democrat in the Democratic Party. He will now run as an independent, third-party run there. So we'll see, and we'll see how that kind of shakes up the race on the Democratic side, whether or not now that RFK Jr. is running as an independent, who's that going to take votes from Republicans or from Democrats mostly? So interesting to note there. Wanted to make sure we got that in with all of this coverage now on the war there in Israel. In the meantime, let's go back, though, to New York City. Still many, especially elected leaders like Gregory Meeks, the congressman from New York, the Democrat. He is speaking at the podium there at this pro-Israeli rally. Let's watch.
You're right or you're wrong. It's an issue of whether we're going to get hate out of this place or not. It's an issue that we got to stand for my brothers and sisters in Israel. Because when you look at what Hamas has done and Hamas has always stood for, we talk about peace. But the truth of the matter is you can't have peace with someone who doesn't want peace. You can't have peace when someone says you don't have the right to exist. You've got to combat and push back. And so I'm here to say that the United States Congress, my colleague Dan Goldman, I was with Grace Ming earlier today. We are going to make sure that Israel has everything that it needs to defend itself. To be silent is to be complicit. We cannot sit on the sidelines. And I got to tell you, as the lead Democrat on the Foreign Affairs Committee, I'm going to be going from country to country and saying, where do you stand? Because this is a human rights issue. And we've all got to stand together and say this can never, ever happen again. Fact of the matter is, I've been to the Gaza Strip. I've been in those tunnels. I've watched people who just wanted to eat, but they have to sit with their faces to the door, scared of someone wanting to attack them. Enough is enough. So I'm going to stand, as the President of the United States has said, making sure that everything that Israel needs is there. I'm standing with the President as he sent George W. Bush ship there to make sure that folks know that the United States is standing strong with Israel. I'm going to stand with my colleagues. I close on this because we think it's so important. I called my colleague, Michael McCall, who's now the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. I said, Michael, we've got to speak with one voice. We've got to make sure our Congress puts something out. We work collectively to draft a resolution to talk about the hate and the heinous acts and the criminality of Hamas, and that we stand with Israel. And when we get back to Washington, D.C., that resolution will be introduced. And it will be, when we have the opportunity to vote on the floor, the very first thing that the Congress does so that we can speak to the world and say that the United States Congress stands with the people of Israel and will do what we have to do to make sure it has everything that it needs to defend itself.
All right, Congressman there, Gregory Meeks, the Democrat from New York, who is, like I said, the ranking member on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, who himself has been to Gaza several times. This right now, Dan Goldman stepping up. He was in Israel during all this. He is, of course, back now safely with his family. Let's just listen in briefly here.
New Yorkers, so many of my friends who are Americans, and so many of my friends who terrorism. On Saturday morning at 6:30, I was lying in bed with my 9-year-old daughter on one side and my 5-year-old daughter on the other side, and sirens went off in Tel Aviv. It is the well-known signal in Israel, but not well known to me or my family, that there are rockets on their way. We had 90 seconds to get to the stairwell in the hotel until the possibility of the rocket landing on our hotel would happen. Thankfully, and in part, large part because of the tremendous partnership between the United States and Israel, the Iron Dome intercepted nearly all of those 2,200 rockets.
without feeling horrified. It's awful, and there's no excusing it. No matter what you think of Israel's policies in Gaza, you are not allowed to shoot people at music festivals. That's a crime. Israel has a right to respond to that crime and to defend itself. No one seriously contests that. The question for American policymakers, however, is what do we do next? How do we represent the interests of the United States in this chaotic moment? That's not a selfish question. It's the whole point of making policy for a country, to improve and protect that country. If you serve in the U.S. Congress or in the executive branch of government, you have a moral duty to think this way. It's your job. You serve the United States and its population. You have no moral authority except to the extent that you represent your fellow Americans. That's our system. It used to be obvious, but it's worth remembering now, because the conflict between Israel and Hamas could escalate into a war between Iran and its allies and the West. Once a war like that starts, you could easily imagine the use of nuclear weapons and all that entails. Millions dead, the collapse of the global economy. At the very least, you could see an unprecedented energy crisis here. Already gas in one Bay Area service station hit $7.29 a gallon over the weekend. If that trend worsens and persists, the United States, which is already, technically speaking, bankrupt, would plunge into depression. And no, it would not be like the 1930s. Close to 10 million people have come here over the last 3 years from the poorest places in the world. The overwhelming majority of them are on some form of federal subsidies. You wonder how that's going to work out when the U.S. government runs out of money. So there's a lot at stake in how we encourage Israel to respond to the horrifying Hamas attacks. Wisdom and long-term thinking are essential, but you will not be surprised to learn that is not what we are getting. Watch this person, for example, who happens to be the media's pick for President of the United States. This was an attack on America, she says, when in fact it was not. And for that reason, we must, quote, finish Iran, a nation of nearly 90 million people. What are we watching here? This is not sober leadership. She's a child, and this is the tantrum of a child, ignorant, cocksure, bloodthirsty. Yet no one in Washington scolded her for it. In fact, they aped her hysteria. Here's fellow neocon Lindsey Graham just spelling it out and calling for the bombing of Iran. What exactly would happen to the United States if we declared war on Iran and started blowing up their infrastructure? Lindsey Graham has no clue what would happen. He hasn't thought it through. He's almost 70 years old and he has no children. He doesn't care. But neither, amazingly, do most of his colleagues in Washington. They're as reckless as he is. Texas Congressman Dan Crenshaw took to social media to call for what he described as a war to end all wars, as if there is such a thing. But of course, there isn't such a thing. Wars beget more war. The bigger the conflict, the uglier and longer lasting the consequences. See World War I for details. These are not complex observations, but they seem lost on our leadership class. Alone among candidates running for the Republican nomination for president, Vivek Ramaswamy dared to suggest that actually going to war with Iran might not be in America's national interest. And for saying that, Mike Pence immediately denounced him as gutless and unpatriotic or something. But we thought it might be worth hearing more. Vivek Ramaswamy joins us now. Vivek, thanks so much for coming on. So if I'm reading this correctly, you suggested, while offering what seemed like real sympathy to the Israeli people, to the many murdered there 2 days ago, you noted that maybe it's not in America's best long-term interest to declare war on Iran. Is that what you said?
I actually said this long before this crisis when people were thinking clear-headedly. And I just want to say a couple of things that are obvious but important, Tucker. I mean, what happened against Israel, you said it, I believe it. It is barbaric, it is medieval, it is wrong, and Israel as a nation absolutely has the right to self-defense, to its own national existence. And I think they should have our moral and diplomatic support as an ally. But there's one element of this that nobody's talking about. What the hell went wrong with U.S. and Israeli intelligence and the Israeli defense that allowed this to happen? Everybody seems to be punting that as a question for later. I think it's a question for now, if you're Israel. I mean, look, I think that Nikki Haley, I disagree with you a little bit there. I don't think she's a child. I think that she is somebody who is, like many politicians, in a position to get wealthier from war. Look at the military contracting business and otherwise. But put that to one side. The message that I would send would be very different. Get to the bottom of what allowed this gaping hole of intelligence and defense to even happen before feeding that same beast. If a doctor told you his job was to keep you from getting cancer and then you got that cancer, don't go trust that same doctor to remove your tumor. They don't let airplanes, when they crash, the pilots or the people who crash the airplane, that airliner is not the one who reviews the black box. And so I think those answers have to come now. That's not a question for later. And I think one of the learnings for the U.S., I think there's a lot of learnings for the U.S., Tucker, but one of the learnings is if that establishment can get it wrong in Israel from a U.S. perspective, that could happen right here at home. And if anything, as an ally, one of the things that we need to wake up to is that we're vulnerable here in the United States to the same. And so we can do some things to prevent that, secure our border, stop funding. I mean, I think one of the things that's been wrong in the U.S. is we have a bad habit while we're bankrupt funding both sides of wars that should have been avoided in the first place. Look at the money that's indirectly found its way to Hamas, the $6 billion paid to Iran in the recent ransom. That was a disaster. Yet we're effectively now funding both sides of a war that we shouldn't have been in the first place in places like Russia and Ukraine even. Think about how we hampered oil production in the United States and then now has funding, U.S. funding going to Ukraine in fighting back against Russia. It's a bad habit in the United States, and we need leaders here who will look after what advances American interests. And I find what Dan Crenshaw said to be cringeworthy. It is shameful. World War I was supposed to be the war that ended all wars, that got us to World War II. That can't be the way that we run foreign policy. The job of American leaders is to advance American interests, and I think we support Israeli leaders asking what advances and defends Israel as we should, morally and diplomatically, but leaders here need to look after American interests first.
The conversation can't be limited to right and wrong. I mean, I don't think there's anyone defending the murder of concert goers in the Negev 2 days ago is, disqualified from, being taken seriously. Yeah. Of course, that's wrong. But it doesn't seem like any American policymaker is even willing to entertain other questions like what's in America's best interest, what effect will this have on the global economy, on our economy, on energy prices. These are not small things. They should not be dismissed, but they are dismissed out of hand, and you're some sort of quizzling if you even raise the question. Why is that? It seems crazy to me.
Well, look, I mean, if you want to ask the question of right and wrong, then open that Pandora's box. I don't favor doing this, but look at what's happening with Azerbaijan and Armenia. You don't really hear much about that now. Why? Because Azerbaijan's lobby is about as effective as Ukraine's is in Washington, D.C. So this selective moral outrage, I do think is a problem.
May I ask you to pause for just one moment there and just unpack that for viewers who are not aware of what you're referring to? Armenia, Azerbaijan, what is happening?
Yeah, so, I mean, what's happening is an atrocity. I mean, you have a people who are Armenians, largely Christians, six-figure numbers, 100, 120,000, being driven back to their country from a region that has long been a place they have called home. A lot of atrocities that aren't even yet coming to light in Western media. But Azerbaijan has a lobby, a powerful lobby in Washington, D.C., and I think a big part of what's wrong in the United States today, Tucker, and I don't mean to toot my own horn, but it's why I'm coming in as an outsider to this nonsense, is you have a system that is bought and paid for, both for the people who run on the Democratic ticket, people who run on the Republican ticket, and people who make those decisions in Washington, D.C. that are effectively managed by, in this case, the Azerbaijan lobby that has a lid on discussing this conflict, which, as you pointed out, most Americans haven't heard of. But you'll hear endlessly about Russia's incursion on Ukraine and having to stand on the right side. That's a separate point where I reject that Ukraine is inherently good anyway. But even if it were, a selective moral outrage in that case, but not another one in just a neighboring area that interfaces with Russia as well. So open that Pandora's box around the world. I mean, look at much of Africa, look elsewhere. You're going to find ability to have selective moral outrage. But you only hear about it in certain selective cases that the media and the existing establishment in both parties deem fit for the American public. And what we need is leaders in this country who are honest in calling out atrocities where they occur. What happened in Israel was wrong. I think we require leaders, some on the far left are too afraid to say it, it was wrong. But at the same time, we need leaders on the right who are willing to say it in other places too, like what's happening in Azerbaijan and Armenia. But at the same time, to have the clarity and American-centric forethought to say what policy decisions we make are separate from the moral judgments that we will pass. So to say we will be with you diplomatically, absolutely. To say you have our moral support, absolutely. That we're not going to get in the way of you defending your national boundaries, absolutely. Even further, to say that in limited circumstances that advance U.S. interests, we will provide munitions. We can't do it across the board. It's a zero-sum game when it comes to munitions between Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan next in the future. But in a limited way that advances U.S. interests, that has to be the sole prism. And that doesn't exist right now, Tucker, in the establishment of either political party. And I think that the things that we're saying now to some may sound uncouth. I don't think they should. This is what the job of a national leader actually ought to be. And that's how I'm planning to lead this country if I'm elected.
I got to say, you mentioned moral outrage, and I thought the videos from southern Israel were morally outrageous, and I was offended by them and saddened by them. Anyone who saw them, I think, was. But you don't have to look far in the United States for moral outrages also on video. And there's not a city in this country, not just the big cities, but cities of 10,000 people. I was in one yesterday that doesn't have some constellation of drug-addicted young people living outside. We call them the homeless. They're drug addicts. And they're addicted to drugs that were imported across an open border, allowed by the Biden administration. And they're dying, more than 100,000 a year. Now, you can call it genocide, you can call it whatever you want, but it's the death of over 100,000 Americans a year and the living death of millions more who are living outside. So I don't understand. People are outraged by what happened in Israel. And again, I want to add my voice to that because I'm a human being. But the scale of the outrage among Republican presidential candidates was so much more intense. One of them took to a bullhorn and started yelling about it. I get it, but no one would think to do that about the 100,000 American young people murdered every year, and they are murdered, honestly, by
give me a
synthetic
bullhorn for
opioids.
that one.
Like,
Chuck.
what?
I'll take my bullhorn for that one. And let's just go a little bit deeper on that one. This is the product of some intentional design. I mean, there are literally synthetic precursors to make synthetic fentanyl coming from Wuhan, of all places, to Mexican drug cartels south of our own border, pumping that up. And you want to just numbers to get the scale intact. 50 times the number of people who died on 9/11 are going to die this year as a consequence of fentanyl just crossing our southern border. A couple days ago, I was actually at our northern border in the northern part of New Hampshire. Totally wide open border. I mean, to call this porous is an overstatement. It's just an open border. And there was enough fentanyl that crossed just last year, 2022, to kill 3+ million Americans. That was just the amount that was caught, let alone the amount that wasn't. And so this is the product of intentional design. People will say, is that because of a drug epidemic in demand? You know, that's a separate debate, but a lot of that fentanyl is being laced into. People who are taking it have no idea that they're taking fentanyl, taking other drugs that have fentanyl in it that's killing them on the spot. That's closer to bioterrorism. Nobody would call it an overdose if you put it in a Big Mac. There is no level of moral outrage. Forget the Democratic Party. I've written that one off. In the Republican Party, of the same scale of this incursion right here at home. And so one of the things that allies do is they learn from each other. I think that intelligence sharing operations is critical with allies, with Israel, and otherwise. I think one of the things we can do is learn from both the successes and, in this case, a bad failure in the case of our ally. To say if we have borders that are as open as ours, even Israel that had a border as tightly protected as its own saw this happen, we could have far worse or the equivalent happening right here at home. I mean, other things that nobody's talking about, Tucker, is not just border defenses. We don't have an Iron Dome in this country, yet we're vulnerable to nuclear missile attacks any given day, and we're marching closer into nuclear conflict in multiple parts of the world, most notably with Russia. Think about cyber defenses. And if that really was a cyber attack, or whatever explanation it might be for why Israel was caught off guard, we're vulnerable to cyber attacks in this country. Electromagnetic pulse attacks, nobody's talking about, that could take out our electric grid, which, by the way, has 60 Chinese transformers in it. You know, talk about space-based defenses, totally missing in the United States of America. That's where my outrage is highest, is our own vulnerability right here in the homeland. And I do not think that it is crass. I think it is the morally correct answer for leaders of nations to ask how they protect the interests of their nation. That comes with allies. And so I think that it is important not to create an equivalence between Hamas and Israel, as some on the American left and European left are trying to do. It is wrong what happened to Israel. And I call that out as a human being and as somebody who's on a belief of some people are on the right side and the wrong side of a conflict. I think that that is far clearer here than it is, for example, in the Russia-Ukraine conflict or other areas where people have baked that cake. But the selective nature of ignoring certain other conflicts, while even more importantly, ignoring the interests of the U.S. right here at home, is what irritates the heck out of me, out of the politicians in both parties. And it is shameful. And I think that there are, frankly, financial and corrupting influences that lead them exactly to speak the way they do. That's just the hard truth.
How could you pay for a much-needed defense system in another country but not in your own country? I don't understand that. I mean, how can you pretend to be a leader in your country if you're doing something like that? It seems so immoral to me.
Well, pretending is a good word to use. I do think it's immoral, Tucker, to abandon, completely abdicate defending our own border, yet worrying about other people's borders more than we worry about our own. That's not to legitimize anything that's happening in other parts of the world. Far from
Obviously
it. It deserves to be condemned. But start, if you're the president of the United States, your obligation is to your homeland. Defend your homeland. People will say in response, and I get this, right, from the other presidential candidates, oh, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. You are neither walking nor chewing gum. You are absolutely leaving our country vulnerable to every form of attack until it's too late. But then it's one thing, Tucker, to say that, okay, people come to this conclusion if this is a new question. This isn't a new question. We spent $3 trillion in Iraq and in Afghanistan. To what end exactly? Is the Taliban still in control in Afghanistan? In Iraq, we still have hostile, effectively anti-American control, vulnerable to Iranian incursion as well while we're at it. To what end? And so if you don't learn from the mistakes of the past, it's not like we haven't had plenty of opportunities to reflect on that in the recent past. If you don't learn from those mistakes in the past, you're destined to make the same mistakes in the future. And right now, we're in a position that's even more bankrupt, even more in the hole, $33 trillion in the hole, than we were when we marched our way into those foreign wars last time around. So I think it's important to be clear about what we will and won't do as the United States of America. That gives clarity to our allies who deserve clarity from the United States. That's the other dimension of this, too, is by being vague about what that means. Yelling, finish them, finish them, finish them into a screen. What does that actually mean? By creating a false equivalence between an attack on America, which thankfully we haven't had, and an attack on an ally of America, you create moral confusion in absence of hard red lines. And I think that's what I'm worried about very much so in Russia. There are no clear red lines when we're using a moral justification to advance a war that doesn't advance American interests. The last thing is we need to repeat that same mistake in other parts of the world. That's a formula for getting to World War III. And if you're someone like a Nikki Haley who is going to profit from World War III, I think you're disqualified from being the President of the United States.
I feel so sorry for the Israelis and for the Ukrainians, for that matter. I have no sympathy at all for our leaders. I think they're disgusting. So let me ask you just one last question. So Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, this Crenshaw guy, probably the entire leadership of the Republican Party is effectively calling for war with Iran, U.S. war with Iran. What would that mean, do you think?
So I do not think that it is a good idea for us to enter war with Iran. I think it would be good, and the outcome that I expect is that Israel will be successful in defeating Hamas here, in protecting its own homeland. They've done it countless times before. I think they're going to do it again. I think it is appropriate for the U.S. to support Israel diplomatically at the UN when they're going to come after Israel or otherwise, for the U.S. to take a strong stand in favor of an ally that has been good and can continue to be good to the U.S. And I think that limited military support as well, without using ground troops on the ground, military support without ground troops, that makes sense. But I think for others who have refused to take the option of ground troops off the table or whatever, I think we're doing a disservice to everybody, especially here in the United States. And I do not think that right now, I mean, one of the things to remember, Tucker, is people at domestic policy will say it's the economy stupid. Foreign policy, it's China stupid. That's really what we need to remember. Russia is being driven further into China's hands. Iran is backed by China economically as well. Sanctions and everything else, part of the reason why they haven't had the effect is that China's still got their back. And so right now, I mean, if you look at even the artillery shells that earlier this year, 300,000 to the tune of U.S. artillery shells stored in Israel that we encouraged to send to Ukraine, it's a zero-sum game. And so we're actually rolling out the red carpet, depleting multiple reserves between Ukraine and Israel. I think we are paving the red carpet for China to annex Taiwan while we still depend on Taiwan foremost for our modern way of life in a way that we don't for Ukraine or other conflicts that we're marching our way into. And so that's the way we need to look at this, is what advances American interests. Yes, stand firmly for what's right and wrong diplomatically and otherwise, but do it in a way that responsibly looks after American interests first. And that's the real divide in the Republican Party. I do think we have a real fundamental ideological divide in the Republican Party, and we ought to be able to have that debate in the open. I think we're not having it right now. And I, for my part, will be unapologetic in standing for putting the interests of this nation first, because that happens to be the office that I'm running for, while being crystal clear about the fact that what happened in Israel was wrong. It was barbaric. It was something that was inhumane, and we have to provide the moral and diplomatic support that we need. At the same time, the job of the U.S. president is to stand for American citizens here in the homeland, and that's how I'm planning to lead.
Well, that's right. They have no right, our leaders have no right except to act in the interest of the United States. Anything outside that is immoral, and they have no authority to do it. So anyway, I appreciate your willing to explain your views on this and to say something that was unpopular with the reckless morons running our country.
If I want to just say one thing, Tucker,
please go
I was
ahead.
just thinking about the why on this, right? Because
Yes.
I think that for me, for a long time, looking at this from the outside, I'm not in the world of politics, or I'm in the world of politics now, but for like all of 7 months. Before that, I'm looking at it from the outside in. You wonder why, right? It's a bit of a mystery when you see the Lindsey Grahams or the Nikki Haley's or the John Boltons or the other people of this persuasion, the Mike Pence's, the Chris Christie wing of this party. Being now in the sport, I think I do have a much better understanding for why it's played the way that it is. It comes down, in most cases, some people do have ideological commitments that are outdated, that are earnest, but a lot of it comes down to money, the corrupting influence of super PACs on the process. And I think that in the same frame of putting American interests first in our foreign policy, even when you think about a left-wing idea from 15, 20 years ago, heck, I'd embrace it now to say, get the influence of super PACs and mega money out of politics. I would be happy to tell any super PAC backing me to give money back to those mega donors and that I want to show up at your events or whatever, as long as Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis and Tim Scott and everybody else parading in a political race as standing for their own views does the same thing. And that's not a panacea. It's not a fix-all. But when you understand that there are interests at work that go beyond just the earnest debate of differing views, that's really, I think, how we're going to get back to honest discourse in the Republican Party and in American politics, is get the influence of mega money out of politics. The super PACs are a cancer. I'm happy to lead the way. But without that, I think we're going to probably just be destined to expect more of the same. That's just the hard fact.
How soulless would you have to be to take cash in exchange for wrecking your own country? And by the way, the ones who are emotionally committed to it, the true warmongers, I know all of them. And I can say this about them, not one of them has a normal sex life. I'm just saying that. That's true. Whatever. I'll leave that to you, Dr. Freud. Anyway, Vivek, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good seeing you.
Xin chào tất cả các bạn. Chào mừng các bạn đã quay trở lại với kênh Đức Gương Channel. Trên tay mình là bức tranh quả cà tím. Cà tím là một loại rau xuất hiện rất nhiều quen thuộc.
The aspirations of the Palestinian people. But from what we've been hearing from those living in Gaza, living under occupation, there is a sense that whether or not they support Hamas's actions, they do want freedom. And to that end, they do support resistance.
Yeah, I mean, Hamas is part of the Palestinian polity, whether people support them or not from an ideological standpoint. But, they do represent a portion of the Palestinian people. They govern Gaza, obviously. And so they, to say that they do not represent the aspirations of the Palestinian people, they don't represent Palestinians, is quite a strange comment. I mean, it's like the president of France saying that Biden doesn't represent the American people, that Trump won the election. For him to make that kind of statement is quite strange. And Hamas is, again, whether you agree with their politics or not, is carrying out their strategy, might find that strategy to be foolish. But nonetheless, I mean, they are a part of the, spectrum of the Palestinian political factions. And so they're there.
Well, let me ask you then what the relationship is like now between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. There's also been an idea of cutting EU aid, for instance, to the Palestinian Authority. People are talking about that as potential collective punishment. There has been pushback to that. What is your assessment of the situation there on the ground between the PA and Hamas?
In this particular moment, right after without the dust having settled, I'm not quite sure, how people in the West Bank or non-supporters of Hamas or Abu Mazen and Fatah are doing at the moment. I think there's a kind of, from what I've seen from officials, such as the Palestinian ambassador to the UN, there's more of a kind of rallying around rallying around the flag and explaining to people that this is not a Hamas action, that this stems from the situation on the ground, the kind of untenable, unbearable situation that Palestinians have been subjected to for 75 years, 56 years of occupation, and for Gaza, obviously 16 years of a blockade. And so this is where, this is coming from. And so it's not a Hamas versus Fatah thing, but more of a Palestinians living under occupation and trying to resist occupation in any way they can. And all other doors have been shut to Palestinians, whether they are the PA, which is recognized as legitimate. Even the negotiation track has been closed to Palestinians. So there's no real open avenue here. It's either sit or do something, and that's what I guess Hamas has chosen to do. However tragic that's unfolding.
Omar Rahman there, a fellow at the Policy Research Institution, the Middle East Council on Global Affairs. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us here on Al Jazeera. Omar will be speaking in the coming hours. Well, let's take you to live pictures now of Gaza City. As you can see, it is extremely dark. We know that Israel has declared a total siege of the territory, that electricity, water and fuel has been cut off to the entire enclave. Well, we will be continuing our coverage, our special coverage of the Gaza-Israel war right here on Al Jazeera after People and Power. Do stay with us.
As the conflict between Gaza and Israel escalates, Al Jazeera's correspondents are on the ground.
Occupied East Jerusalem.
Armed men have crossed onto the other side of the border.
This is happening right now in Tel Aviv. This was a business.
Israeli forces declaring a state, what they call, of war.
Air raids are shaking the Gaza Strip in different areas.
Stay with us for the latest developments on Al Jazeera.
Artificial intelligence is quickly becoming one of the defining technologies of our time. As tech companies pile into AI, the limits of what computers can do are expanding dizzyingly fast, blurring the line between fact and fiction, real and AI-generated. But can these advances leave democracies and elections vulnerable to a torrent of disinformation and disruption? People in Power investigates.
For a quarter of a century now, the crown has been slipping from our fingers. Humans and our brains no longer reign supreme. Over 6 games in 1996 and 7, IBM's Deep Blue defeated legend Garry Kasparov. It was the first time a computer had beaten a chess world champion under standard tournament time rules. The AI age had dawned. But are we now approaching its high noon? Beating humans at chess? Too easy these days. The last few months have seen colossal advances in machine learning capabilities. Artificial intelligence can now think and write like us, and it can create pictures and video indistinguishable from reality.
This morning, an emboldened China invades Taiwan.
This Republican attack ad warns of a near-future apocalypse if Joe Biden wins re-election. Only a tiny note in the screen's corner says the pictures are all AI-generated.
No.
Here's a parody created with AI for the Russian broadcaster RT.
Why did you feel unable to fire Thatcher?
Donald Trump hugging his former medical advisor and bogeyman of the US right, Anthony Fauci. Fake pictures used by Trump's Republican rival Ron DeSantis. And what about these? Donald Trump does have mounting legal problems, but this series is completely imagined. The man behind them is Elliot Higgins, founder of the open-source investigation outfit Bellingcat. Dipping his toes into AI fakery was both an experiment and a warning.
This was around the period where there were rumours that Donald Trump would be arrested, but also the latest version of Midjourney, which is an AI image generation tool, had been released. And I was playing around with it, and just as a kind of almost just a bit, really, just a little joke, I thought I'd generate an image showing Donald Trump being arrested.
You have obviously had a lot of fun with this. Did you have any qualms about doing it?
I wanted to show, first of all, how much you could actually do with this kind of thing and how detailed you could get, because I was really shocked myself with the realism of these images.
You've spent most of your career kind of specifically debunking lies and disinformation. Where does AI take us down that road?
We've always had misattributed images. We've always had images that have been altered and faked. And what's different here is it's now anyone can very easily make fake images that look realistic. In terms of this imagery as information, I think it could be a huge problem.
So if we wanted to make some new ones, do you think we could do it on my laptop?
Yep, let's give it a go on your laptop.
And you can show me how easy or difficult it is.
Okay, so let's imagine, so let's focus on Rishi Sunak for the moment, playing golf, something nice and simple. Let's see what happens. That should create a fairly straightforward image. I don't know why they put him in pink clothes, but...
Let's try Donald Trump waving a kind of rainbow pride flag.
Okay. Ah, there we go.
Those are very realistic.
Yeah, and this is something that is very, very low effort.
And in the space of, what, a couple of minutes, we've created potentially a bit of disinformation here.
Yeah, I mean, you think if the way you use social media, you don't spend more than a few seconds looking at an image on social media before you decide whether you're going to share it or scroll by it. So someone could see that, go, ha, retweet, and then 10,000 other people do the same thing. Yeah. It goes viral very, very quickly.
Elliot's laid out a worrying equation here. The ease and plausibility of AI fakery times the force multiplier of social media. It equals alarm bells for truthful politics around the world.
We don't want your bag in the picture.
An era-defining collision will soon take place. AI is about to crash into major democratic elections. What you're seeing here is Small Fry campaigning for a by-election in Boris Johnson's old constituency seat in the outer London suburbs of Uxbridge and South Ruislip.
And make no mistake about it, we're going out to fight with everything we've got.
But next year, there'll almost certainly be a general election. This is political campaigning as it's been done for generations here in the UK, pounding the streets and handing out bits of paper like this. But how relevant is all of that in an AI world?
As your son said, murdered in cold blood and kidnappings. In Israel, politics and the many protests that have happened this year have been put aside in favor of a united response to this wanton violence. And in America, we need to do the same. Israel has always been the strongest in its support here in America when we have the kind of bipartisan support on display here tonight. In that regard, I salute Congressman McCall, who has joined with his ranking member from New York, Greg Meeks, in preparing a resolution that I joined yesterday that followed a very informative briefing about the situation in Israel. After recounting the war crimes that happened this weekend, and reaffirming our commitment to Israeli security, condemning Hamas, calling on other countries to do the same, and urging the full enforcement of all U.S. sanctions against Iran and Iran's funding of terrorist groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad. We indicate our readiness to respond promptly to the administration request for emergency resupply and other security, diplomatic, and intelligence support. This afternoon, shortly before coming here, together with other colleagues, we have also forwarded to the administration a formal bipartisan.
Okay, so we wanted just to show you some of these events that are happening nationwide. This one there in Austin, Texas. Texas Governor Abbott was there at this showing his solidarity with the people of Israel. And so let's keep moving here as well as we bring in more and more experts to talk about the situation going down on the ground, what the U.S. response is going to be, the history, the context that is going into this. And we're going to do that right now with Christopher Alexander. He joins me. And Christopher, thanks so much for being with us. I know you've been following this very, very closely, and you have a lot of experience, especially in intelligence and information warfare. And so I don't think we've spoken since this is all unfolded, but your overall impressions about where the assault there in Gaza stands now.
Well, I think looking at it from the information operations and narrative warfare side, if you will, I think the concern is that despite all the care that goes into avoiding collateral damage, Hamas is hoping the Israelis make a mistake. And these things are inevitable in combat operations. And it's the nature of sort of the game, if you will, here. Israel makes the slightest mistake and the entire Arab world reacts to some unfortunate collateral damage, and then that causes Israel's reputation to spiral. So they're really in a tough place where they need to conduct effective combat operations, but they just have to do everything perfectly. And that's just not reasonable to ask of any army in the field.
All right, and Christopher, we're showing our live picture that we have over Gaza at the moment. You can hear, those noises. We know what those are, the strikes, the targets, the shelling, the gunfire there. Why was this so surprising to Israeli officials, do you think? I mean, we've been bringing on experts throughout the last 3 days, and every single day, 24/7, Israel prepares for something like this, don't they?
They do, but you have lapses in intelligence. I think in this case you had two distinct elements. You had a lapse in intelligence that would provide an early warning, because as ready as you want to be, you can't be at 100% all the time, right? You have to stand down and you have to have readiness levels, or your troops become exhausted and they're even less effective. For some reason, the intel community failed to provide the right threat posture, if you will, to the Israeli Defense Force. And for some reason, the Israeli Defense Force, the combat units, also failed in their rapid reaction, or QRF, as we would call it, a quick reaction force. So it seems like it's both an intelligence and an operational.
Yeah, my other question, too, is, essentially the security posture Israel takes. They have the Iron Dome. They have a very, very large, thick wall on the southern border near the Gaza Strip as well. That was breached in several locations. More than 1,000 Hamas terrorists, they came in through that, and also by sea. We're getting some reports in, and by air as well. And so this was a full-out assault. And so help us work through some of that security apparatus that Israel has in place, that there were some failures in, right?
Sure. So I guess to start outside, let's say in Gaza, and then work towards, say, Tel Aviv with how this would work. You've got ground assets, human intelligence, you've got satellite assets, and you're detecting what's flying through the air, electronic assets and listening. And so you see indicators that something's going to happen. Munitions are being moved. There's more radio traffic than normal, cell phone traffic, movement in and out of safe houses. There's going to be a bunch of indicators, even if they're down underground in these tunnels that they're talking about. And so that's where the first kind of question is going to have to be answered by the IDF is how did they miss the preparation to move what is larger than essentially a battalion-sized element, which hasn't been seen in quite some time, into Israel like that. So it starts there by not saying, the intel folks saying, hey, we're seeing something, we might need to be more ready than usual. And of course, it is possible that they did, right? That report didn't get passed up the chain. There was a breakdown in communication. It seems pretty improbable, but these things happen. Then you've got the wall itself and the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome, I understand, worked pretty well, but it got overwhelmed, which goes back to 3,000 rockets and however many mortars and artillery shells get launched all at once or in short order like that. On the ground side of it, my understanding is the wall has what's called a SCADA system. So the minute you penetrate that fence line, there's an alert that goes out. And when that alert goes out, that's when you've got everybody's gear stowed, they're grabbing it, running into the helicopter, mounting up in vehicles, and they're moving out to address the issue. And now what happened there? I understand that the unit that's a commando unit directly responsible for combating Hamas, the commander was killed,
right?
Because they went in, and that tells me that they were probably overwhelmed and they were doing the best they could. But a lot of questions as to what happened. Were they overwhelmed and there weren't enough resources? They were stretched too thin. How did they get surprised, and how were they not able to respond quickly enough? Or things they're going to have to sort in the next few days?
Yeah, talk about being surprised, or the resources may have been not, focused on that specific area near the Gaza Strip, but elsewhere, diverted, to the West Bank and elsewhere, some of the settlements outside of the West Bank and in the West